That is our cue to start. So we will get started with our next panel, which is Art, Tech, and Sustainability. So our speakers today are Christian Thomas, John Bateman, Brittany Klintworth, and Abby Kreinheder. So I will hand it off to Christian, and he'll be kicking us off with his presentation about AI and art.
Good morning, everyone. How's everybody feeling today? So my name is Christian Thomas. I am a junior at Hampton University studying journalism and leadership. And over the summer, I traveled to Tokyo, Japan, and New York City, two cities revered for their artistic individualism and technical prowess, to document a world on the verge of a new era in technology. During my reporting, I explored the complex relationship artists have with artificial intelligence to hopefully produce a story of hope, companionship, and innovation amidst a time of grave uncertainty. Here's my title page. So about my project, I'm sure everybody in here has been all too familiar with the topic of artificial intelligence within the news. Like with a show of hands, how many are familiar with AI? Yep. Yep. So I'm sure I wanted my project to demystify the shared hesitancy that persists about the integration within creative industries. In Japan, I followed an AI art group based in Tokyo called Paramita. Paramita started last year in August, formed to promote peace between mankind and machine. They actually started out of a time crunch. As they were trying to exhibit some work, they kind of turned to Midjourney to actually create their work in record time. So their work features Japan's culturally complex history, with work featuring the country's samurai past, nuclear tragedies, and religious beliefs. Now, I determined the concept for my project while scrolling through social media. Amidst the heaps of AI-produced content, I would find dozens more comments expressing discontent and dismissal of AI artists. With the negative comments that you can see on the screen, the perspective I was most eager to kind of pursue was that of the AI artist, because that was the least reported. I couldn't find actually any articles depicting AI art as something as a positive versus a negative. While planning my article, I knew I wanted my article to follow an AI artist. It wasn't until I landed in Japan that I discovered Paramita. And it was actually pretty much of like a time crunch on my own part, because I had to keep on researching past my pre-reporting while I was in Japan, and then I stumbled upon it like through an advertisement. And so I was like, as soon as I reached out to them, they would like come to my studio, see what's going on, and then that's how I formed a relationship with that group. When I met the group, I learned that using AI is more than just creating a cool and trendy art piece. For them, it was about depicting Japan's culture through the lens of the machine. Using AI's generative art programs like Midjourney and ChatGPT, this group has produced multiple series of AI-produced work. Another topic I wanted to cover was how other countries propose regulations on AI. So in Japan, they don't have as strong of a regulation as we do in the US, but they're actually talking about it on a greater, more significant setting, as their prime minister is also in their talks with them, with artificial intelligence, kind of workshopping how they want to go about it in the future. So throughout my project, I want to kind of go through my sources that I went through. So first, I met Ruport, who was a blogger and a manga writer. He created a work called Cyberpunk Peach John, which is the world's first AI manga. And pretty much he goes by Ruport, and he had like this cat alias that he kind of went through with it. So it was kind of interesting doing an interview with him through Zoom as an animated cat, but but it worked out pretty well. So next I'm gonna go through the group at Paramita. So I want to go first with Rina Matsuyama and Koshiro Minamoto. They're actually the founding members of Paramita. And so Rina is a painter, filmmaker, and producer, and Koshiro is a painter, samurai artist specializing in traditional Japanese warrior theater known as No. And so while I was at their studio, I met Iri Namiki, which is, right here. And so she's a producer of producer and founder of Sunday Production Company, a theater and television production company in Tokyo. So when I met them at their studio, they were working on the backdrop for a play that Erie is making called, it's about their past with war fighters, and pretty much during that they kind of wanted to portray, because this was during the time of their new World War II and all that's going on. They want to kind of promote the unity between countries of America and Japan. And so pretty much got to learn a lot from them and how they kind of want to soil the two countries, or kind of build a unity between the two countries. To kind of promote the anti-AI movement, which is kind of the backdrop of mine, so I can kind of get that full story behind AI art and kind of get why artists are against it. I spoke to Lisa Chant, which is a digital artist and creator of the Steal Like an Artist artwork at the Anti-AI Art Show, which was in New York City. Also, I interviewed SAIC, which is the curator of the Anti-AI Art Show in New York City. And then Takashi Ki was the final person in Japan that I interviewed, who was a member of Japan's House of Representatives for the Congressional Democratic Party of Japan. Together, all 7 of them helped me gain a full scope of the conversation surrounding artificial intelligence as it persists to creative industries like art. Now, throughout my throughout my reporting, I went through a number of challenges, but also figured out my way throughout it. So, one of them was like the reporting length that I had and the time constraints. So I got there and I had about a week and a half to kind of cover everything I wanted to cover. So pretty much making sure that I can get to this team, see how they kind of how they use AI, as well as getting that background knowledge was something that was a little bit of a challenge. But the only thing that I did have to come back to the U.S. to do was the interview with the Japanese politician, because his schedule was so busy during that time. Navigating cultural and linguistic differences was definitely something that was major within mine. I had to go through Upwork to kind of get a translator for my project, but with that, I never even got a translator for in person, so I actually just used my phone on the Apple Translator app to do all of my interviews, and then I paid the actual translators afterwards to kind of actually get the verbatim what my sources said. So it was kind of interesting using that technology to help me out in that case. And then establishing my reporting focus. So this topic is very broad, actually. So there's a part where Paramedia does their work because it's a very religious background. They want to kind of display the requiem of like between heaven and hell within their artwork. And so they use AI to kind of help them with the backdrops. And then they kind of use a projector to project their work that was on the AI art, and that they use Midjourney to produce, and then they paint on top of that, and then they go through and kind of exhibit their work from that. So they have studios in Dubai, a lot of studios, like around 3 to 4 studios in Tokyo that they kind of exhibit their work in. So yeah, so that's a little bit about my project. So before I go, I would like to go through a number of people who I want to thank. So first, I want to thank the Pulitzer Center for allowing me to use this opportunity to express something that I've always been interested in. I've always been interested in technology and kind of building like that understanding of seeing the new eras within the world, like Renaissance. Like you have the Renaissance era of art. I'm thinking now it's probably going to be the technology side. So that's what I hope, and that's what I always thought was kind of interesting. Next, I want to thank my family for instilling the confidence for me to travel almost 7,000 miles to cover my topic. Professor Lynn Waltz and the late, great Professor Maynard Eaton for trusting me with this monumental opportunity. So Professor Maynard Eaton is like a legendary journalist, civil rights activist at Hampton University. He passed away like right after allowing me to do this opportunity, so I'm kind of doing it in his honor. And then finally, everybody in the audience I want to thank. Thank you for listening, and I hope everybody has a good rest of their day.
Good morning. How's everybody? So I'm John Bateman, School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I just finished my MFA in writing. I grew up in Mississippi before I went to grad school. I'm probably the oldest fellow here. I could be your dad for a lot of you. Before I went to grad school, I was the executive director of a local arts agency in Mississippi. And I started to notice this trend about it's a topic everyone talks about, especially in philanthropy, but it seems like there's a lot of conversations. I wanted to know what actions were happening, particularly after George Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020. For those of you who may not remember the timeline, George Floyd was murdered on May 25th of 2020, and on June 6th, That day alone, there were an estimated 500,000 participants in 550 protests across the country. There was a big push for change, or at least a lot of talk about the change, and so I wanted to look at the data. Why is this important? Well, there's a public policy for government funding of the arts. So specifically, I looked at the grant applicants to the Mississippi Arts Commission who were seeking grant funding from the Arts Commission, which has this policy for inclusion of all citizens in diverse artistic experiences. So the project summary involved 2 open records requests. I had to actually file an ethics complaint to get the data at one point. That was an interesting, nerve-wracking experience. I covered 3 years, the fiscal years 2020 through 2022, which covers the data from 2019 through 2021. I just jumped ahead too quickly. So the Arts Commission grant applications request 2 data points. This is self-reported information from the organizations, but the data points are on the demographics of the board and of staff. And for the board, they want to know race by categories that the Arts Commission sets forth, and disability. It's disability is either yes or no, and race is white, black, Native American, Asian, and then they sometimes say Latino, sometimes they say Hispanic. Those are distinctive, but they're kind of conflated in these applications. And then another category for other, for anybody that doesn't fit one of those 5. They don't ask the disability question for staff. So looking at 2020, takeaway, I severely underestimated the time it would take to compile data. I would talk to a data expert before I actually start compiling it, and I might consider doing a sample request first. So no, I'm only going to highlight a couple of pieces of data here because I really want to focus on not the pre-reporting revealed some unfairness, but what I want to focus on is one particular interview that really revealed a lot about the issues that are behind these numbers, and I'll get to that in a second. But a couple of numbers: in 2020, 136 applications. Average board membership was almost 76% white. The population of Mississippi, the white population is 56% at this time. 16 boards out of 136 were majority not white. 28 had 1 or more board members with a disability. So, what changed? A year after George Floyd, 17 boards had a majority not white. That's an increase of 1. The average percent of board members who are white dropped almost a couple of percentage points to 74. 35 organizations had 1 or more board members with a disability, so that increased. So 127 applicants. Are the numbers changing? Well, maybe not. So this is really one of the surprises I learned. So from 2020 to 2022, the number of boards that had no representation outside of white or black increased from 88 to 94. That surprised me. So I have a couple more interviews to do, but that was one thing that particularly surprised me. The number of organizations, the number of all white boards increased from 15 to 19. And almost every board that had 20 members or more was at least 75% white. So those were 3 things I was not expecting. When you have a giant board and it's 90% white, that feels awkward. And the pre-reporting and the interviews that I conducted confirmed the idea that if a board doesn't look like its community, then it's not going to represent the community. But the important thing that everyone brought up, which was also talked about in the Supreme Court decision, Students for Fair Admission against Harvard, was the idea that it's about lived experience, it's not about a quota. So sometimes the cause of the numbers, and maybe even the answer, is messy. I interviewed Myrna Cawley-Lee, who is considered the premier costume designer in black theater in the United States. She lives in Mississippi. She is not from Mississippi, but she's been there for 30 years. She was on the board of the Arts Commission for about 20 years. And I will just let her share a couple of stories. Oh, she's about to talk about an organization that was attempting to integrate some arts programming. The name of the organization is CARE. It's in Charleston, Mississippi, so that's where this interview starts. The full length is 4 minutes. I condensed it to 2, so this is really not edited very much at all.
I witnessed a really strange thing that puzzled me, and that was that the person who was the director, her name was Klintworth, and she had invited some of the young white kids to come because it's care and the kids are used to taking classes there. And when they came and saw a room full of black kids, they turned around at the door before coming in and ran and caught their grandmother and left. And they didn't come in. And I turned to Glenn and said, "What made that happen?" She said, "People just aren't used to it." But it's been my observation that people don't know how to do things together. They have a hard time doing it together. Black people feel care is not for them. They just aren't accustomed to going to the cultural center that's in the middle of town. They feel it's not for them. They're more connected to their churches. So if it was happening at their church, they would come. And they would come because they knew me, but they wouldn't come if I wasn't there. When I first moved here, the high school, the local high school, had 2 homecoming queens and 2 homecoming kings, so that there was a black one and a white one, and they felt they were being fair. And it startled me because I'd lived in New York for 30 years. And I didn't know what to make of it. And it wasn't negative, but it wasn't positive. It was weird. The country has a hard time getting past its past. And it shows up in things, and I think it shows up in the arts a bit. And I'm not sure what the fix is.
I was surprised by her comment, "I don't know what the fix is," because within that clip, she reveals an answer, and that's visibility, that's representation. She says, "They went there because I was there." She was part of that, so the community joined the arts events. Numbers start the conversation. We need an inventory, but it's got to go beyond the inventory. How do we use this inventory to then turn around and focus on the lived experience? And so most of the interviews I conducted talk about that aspect of diversity and inclusion. I do think this is a longer project. 1 year of data, 2 years of data is not enough. 3, 5, 10 years to see if there is actually movement and what that movement means. A surprise, policymakers. I contacted maybe 10 or so policymakers, state-level policymakers across the political spectrum. Nobody responded. I thought that was a missed opportunity, but maybe I need to contact 50. I don't know. I was surprised at that. MAC, the Mississippi Arts Commission, is interested in this project. They want to see the data after I'm done, so that was helpful to see. And one of the wonderful things about interviewing Myrna was, like, once somebody gets comfortable with you, just let the camera roll, let the audio roll, because then something magic happens and you get these wonderful clips and you think, oh my gosh, this is where the story needs to go. So thank you so much. Thank you to the Pulitzer Center, and thank you for all of you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany, and my project is the fashion industry through an intersectional feminist lens. So hopefully over this weekend when you've seen me, you've thought something along the lines of like, oh, she likes clothes, because then my project and why it matters to me makes a lot of sense. So since I like clothes, I know that fast fashion is a feminist issue. And the reason for that is because mass producing clothing at the rate that's needed to keep up with fast fashion trends puts an added strain on already strained garment workers, and garment workers are predominantly women. So to give a bit of insight as to what it's like to work in the textile industry currently, I'll share with you a conversation I had with an expert from Human Rights Watch. I asked her, what does the best case and the worst case scenario look like for a garment worker? And she said, and I quote, "The worst case scenario is status quo." And she went on to say that she can't imagine that things could get much worse than they already are. So some of the issues that garment workers deal with are low wages, which is probably the most pressing issue, excessive overtime, difficulty unionizing, and building safety in some countries. And then I said, garment workers are predominantly women, so some women-specific issues that garment workers deal with are sexual harassment at work, gender-based discrimination, pregnancy-based discrimination, and fewer maternity protections. So I said that fast fashion is a feminist issue. So if that's the case, then in my mind, slow, ethical fashion should be a feminist solution, which is what I focused on for my project. Over the summer, I went to Verona, Italy to visit Progetto Quid, which is a sustainable and ethical clothing company. The brand releases small, limited editions of batches of clothing. So actually, when I visited them, I found out that they only release 2 collections a year, a spring, summer, and a fall, winter collection. And then something really fun that they do is they give fabric a second chance, they call it. So like 95% of the fabric that they use is excess fabric from other brands. So it's either donated to them from these brands or they buy it at a discounted rate. And by using this type of fabric, they're helping to reduce textile waste. So when I was initially researching somewhere to like focus on, and I was looking into brands, I found that a lot of them were doing some really cool things environmentally, like reducing textile waste, but that was kind of where it stopped, and I had a much harder time finding brands that were being proactive in making sure that their business practices were ethical and their garment workers were cared for. So when I found Progetto Quid, they really stood out to me because they focus on hiring people who face exclusion and discrimination in the labor market with a special focus on women. And they hire migrants, formerly incarcerated people, recovering addicts, and people close to the retirement age. So I want to share a little bit about what it's like to be a garment worker at Progetto Quid. So because they do have a staff that is predominantly women there, they built a work schedule with moms in mind. So the garment workers work Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. They have a 30-minute lunch break, which is something that they themselves opted for so they could go home earlier. They have a 10-minute break in the morning and another one in the afternoon. They have maternity leave, and then Progetto Quid follows minimum wage laws, and many of their garment workers receive above minimum wage. So all of those things that I mentioned are very basic things and should be the norm, but unfortunately are not. And then some extra things that Progetto Quid does for their garment workers is, so I mentioned that they hire migrants. So because of that, many of them don't speak Italian or they speak very little Italian. So they have what they call a welfare officer on site. And she helps the garment workers with things outside of work, like finding housing, opening a bank account, and navigating the asylum permit process, which apparently is very difficult and confusing. And then during the pandemic, when everything shifted to online services, the welfare officer recorded video tutorials explaining how to access those services. So how to do things like make a doctor's appointment or receive benefits that were offered during the pandemic. And then one more special thing that they do is they have a psychologist available for their employees 3 to 4 times a month for free. So all of these things are ways that Progetto Quid kind of goes above and beyond, and especially in terms of how the garment industry is. So to wrap this up, I want to share a bit of a conversation I had with the company's communications officer, Vanessa. We were talking about the brand's price range, and she was saying how a t-shirt from them may be around 20 euros, which can feel steep for consumers who are used to fast fashion prices. But you have to factor in the cost of materials, and then you have to pay the people who make it. And when she was talking about this, I mentioned how Zara has a similar price range to them, but it's fast fashion. And Vanessa said, when you buy from places like that, you don't know what's behind the production of their products. She then said, behind every garment, there is a story. And I thought of that as I visited their store, and I saw their clothing hanging there, and I just saw the people from the factory, and they made these items. And now I look at clothing at home, which I do very often because I like clothing. But when I look at them, I think of the stories behind the garments, and I want to support places like, Progetto Quid that are not only doing the bare minimum, but also taking those extra steps to care for their employees, because it's never just clothing, and the stories behind the clothing revolve around the people who make the clothing, and they are what matter, and they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Abigale Kreinheder. I do go by Abby, and I'm here to talk to you about a very obscure coffee. So I'm not sure about any of you, but about 6 months ago I didn't even know coffee grew on a tree. And I thought that was odd because I consume it every day. I mean, I see all of us around with a coffee mug, and we drink it, and we're honest, at least myself, was clueless about it. So it kind of led me down this long path of learning about different coffees around the world, and that led me to Kopi Luwak. And so my project is on the last traces of wild Kopi Luwak. And don't worry, for those of you who have never heard what this word means or anything about it, I will get to that. I first really wanted to thank the Pulitzer Center, though, for giving me this opportunity, and especially this Washington weekend, because my reporting project starts tomorrow. I will fly to Medan, Indonesia. So in about 3 days, I will arrive in a very remote area of the country in North Sumatra called Takengon. Takengon is a very small village. It's on a lake called Lake Laut Tawar. It's nestled in the Gayo Highlands, which is a province in North Sumatra. And here you can see on the map where Takengon is in respect to Indonesia, and a little bit closer here. This area is really known for its beautiful landscape. The lake, of course, is a big aspect. There are legends of goddesses. They have horse races, and then, of course, Arabica coffee is grown here. The tropical climate, a high altitude of around 1,500 meters above sea level, the cooler temperatures, and the soil, the very rich soil, a very unique foundation to grow these coffee trees. And Arabica coffee, if you're not aware, in Starbucks you see Sumatra coffee around the world. It is considered a very high quality coffee. And these little tiny rodents called the Asian palm civets also think so as well. So this is where I get into what Kopi Luwak is. It's not your ordinary coffee that you pick off trees. You see these animals, the Asian palm civets. They work in symbiotically with the coffee farmers to create Kopi Luwak. And you can see here the rodents, and then what we have here is actually poop. So this is the Gayo Highlands. So Kopi Luwak naturally is when the civets, these animals, really graze in the highlands here, and they fill their bellies with fruits and seeds and guavas, passion fruits, and of course coffee cherries, very ripe coffee cherries. And the coffee cherry is partially digested in the animal's stomach, and then out comes a payday. So these farmers then go and they scavenge through the jungles on their coffee plantations for these golden treasures, these golden little paydays. And you ask why would they do this? So it's interesting to think about the history here. So Kopi Luwak is rooted in colonial history. It began as a loophole to Dutch rule, so that the native people were not allowed to enjoy the fruit of their labor. They weren't allowed to enjoy the coffee, and so they found this loophole where they saw that these animals were digesting the coffee cherries and excreting the coffee beans. So the farmers obviously thought that this was a really poor quality of coffee. But it turns out that there are very large differences between Kopi Luwak and regular coffee, and it can't be achieved otherwise. There are a lot of differing opinions on this, of course, and controversy. But it is true that the animal strips a lot of the caffeine in the coffee, thus making it less bitter and a little bit more smooth. And so this coffee became seen as a delicacy, a luxury, and of course, international demand grew. And so this is where it gets a little different. This is where they're scavenging in the jungle. And so while some Gayo coffee farmers continue to pursue sustainable and ethical production of this coffee, they do not reflect the mass. The lack of scalability in the natural process has kind of caused and undermined the incentive for producing it naturally and wildly and ethically, and so that led to the manipulation of the process where various civet species, not just the Asian palm civet, but also endangered species of the viverand family, are now caged, force-fed, a very restricted coffee cherry diet. They're malnourished, they're diseased, and it's very horrifying to see. And the international demand for this commodity has really just inherently caused the industrialization of the civet coffee across Southeast Asia, not just Indonesia. And media platforms have exposed this, including the BBC expose in 2013 that caught a lot of attention, but thousands still remain in captivity. And as a result, this industry still faces a lot of criticism. However, the Gayo farmers in the Sumatra area have kind of been forgotten from the narrative and looped into the BBC expose that was specifically only shot in Bali. So in a world driven by this expansion, instant gratification, greed, needing to meet demand for the international world, these farmers continue their sustainable practices. So here are two farmers that are from the North Sumatra area who I will be speaking to. So on the left here is Ian. So Ian and his wife, Rosa, they have a small coffee farm in the village of Benar Maria, which is only about 30 miles away from where I'll be. And Ian produces wild Kopi Luwak, where he collects it on his coffee plantation and from other farmers in the area. He collects it mainly in the jungle next to a mountain called Berni Telong, which is a very sacred mountain in the area. And then I'll also be talking to Hampton. He also has what he calls a coffee garden in Benar Maria, who I will visit, and he's what they call a coffee collector. So it's very important that this coffee gets picked up right in the morning after the animal does its business, so that is not sitting there and bacteria grows. So he goes to all the farms in the local area and picks up the luwak from those farmers. He then brings it to a larger processing facility with a cooperative or processes it himself. And as well as Ian, I will hope to learn a little bit more about this process while I'm there. So here, a little bit more of the location specifically, where I'll be going in Benar Maria and the mountain that I just mentioned. I want to say that when I first approached this story, I knew it wasn't really going to be easy. It was very strange, and there are very different elements of the story. It's very nuanced, as many of ours have been. And I realized that I wanted to tell a story from where it started, where the roots are. And that began with the local coffee farmers, because there is so much to say about the controversy with the factory farming side, the animals' rights issues surrounding the counterfeit market, the lack of certification processes, and the growth in certification processes, the effects of maintaining this history and also exploiting it for marketing purposes, the international demand and environmental aspects, because it is an animal and they are grazing and they are help reforesting the area. And there's just so much to navigate with the story, but it truly all began with these farmers who are continuing to do this. And so I'm very excited to go there and ask them the question, what Kopi Luwak means to them, because to me and to all of us who are viewing this on media, it is easy to have our own opinions, but what does it really mean to them? How does it affect their daily lives? And I'm very excited for that. So thank you so much for your time.
Great job, everybody. You did wonderful. And so, per usual, I will first ask if you guys have any questions for each other about what you heard or saw.
I guess I'll start real quick. So I had my first question is for Brittany, and so you kind of touched on this already about if the expense, if fast or slow fashion is expensive. And so I wanted to know if you believe that could slow fashion actually be widely acceptable or accessible at that price range that it usually is to for people who want to kind of get into that sustainability movement within clothes?
That's a really great question. So that was actually something that we talked about. I talked about when I was visiting Progetto Quid, because, you know, although their prices are like a little bit higher than like the ultra fast fashion, like, you know, places like Shein, they are on par with other fast fashion places like Zara, like I mentioned, you know. So their whole goal is to have it at a price point where people can choose to be, you know, sustainable and ethical with them. But you're right, not all fast fashion is accessible for everyone, because some of it is just really expensive. So, but there are options out there where it can be affordable. It just depends.
Okay. And I guess I have a question real quick for, a comment and a question for Abigale. First off, I can't wait to kind of hear about how farmers will go about advertising coffee that comes out of that animal's rear end, first of all. Because it's a little more palatable to think about bees with honey, but that's a little bigger of an animal. But first, I want to know, or I would like to know on your trip, have you been able to research like how profitable that coffee has been so far? Because you said it's gaining traction.
Yes. So actually what initially led me on this was I saw a report, lots of different reports on the industry saying that it expects to dramatically increase from now 2023 through 2030. And I'm like, what is this coffee? So that's what started it. So there are, because of the international demand, because somehow more caging is going on, captivating these animals from the wild. And so that's happening, but also the amount of supposed wild Kopi Luwak being sold has increased. So that doesn't balance out there. That doesn't necessarily make sense. So clearly something is happening with the counterfeit market and the trendiness, I guess, of this coffee, that it is increasing. So yes, it is somehow it is a growing industry, but it is also interesting to know that the true wild production, sustainable production of it is uncertain. I mean, it's always been uncertain, but it's very uncertain because environmental aspects, and then also now this the issues of taking the animals from the wild. So I hope that answers.
So I have a question for Christian, and I couldn't help but think the criticisms of AI and art how much do they echo criticisms of any new art form that comes out? And I was just curious if the artists talked about that and what their opinions were on that.
Okay, so good question. So my reporting focused pretty much on like the technological aspect in that regards. Pretty much all the artists that I kind of interviewed, they're already in that digital space of art, and so they've already themselves heard that conversation of digital art's not real art in the past. But I kind of found it interesting that they're like with the anti-AI art group, or not anti-AI art group, the anti-AI art show. Pretty much with that, the show wasn't specifically focused around specifically just being against AI art. I found out by interviewing the actual curator. It was kind of based off of just getting the general, like, how everybody felt about AI art in the art community. And so there's a lot of positives and negatives within that art exhibit. But I just found it interesting how a lot more digital creators versus like actual painters, like those who are in the AI art group, they're more against AI art than anybody even the ones who are traditional artists, if that answered your question. Did it? Okay.
All right, folks, it's your turn. Anusha.
Thank you, everyone. I feel like, I'm Anusha. I'm from the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you guys all for your presentations. I thought they were so interesting and really different from a lot of what we've heard this weekend, so they're super cool. My question is for Abby, because, I mean, this also might be outside of the scope of your project, but I'm really curious kind of how you kind of are going to integrate like the consumer perspective, because like when I think about how I consume coffee, like I barely even know like what type of coffee it is, let alone like how that particular type of coffee is sourced, like whether it's sustainable or not. But I mean, I personally would be willing to pay a little bit more for coffee that's sustainably sourced. So I'm curious how you kind of are gonna like navigate like seeing how like coffee in Indonesia gets spread to the rest of the world and how consumers think about their consumption of coffee beans.
Thanks for that question. I think that begins first with knowledge and just curiosity. So I think beginning this story in a way that does ignite that curiosity in someone to want to learn more is going to be a big challenge, really nailing that. When it comes to the research side of things, so First, I just want to mention that you say you wouldn't mind paying a bit more for a sustainable cup of coffee. This coffee does go for around $500 a pound. If you order it in London or anywhere around the world, it's like $60 a cup because it can take 7 months to create just one bag of coffee because you never know when you're gonna find little paydays. And so that is one thing. Since I will be traveling all the way over, I will be meeting with managers of cooperatives, not just only the farmers, to get more of an understanding of how they're working with fair trade, for instance, and things like that to have a fair price for their coffee, paying the farmers, ensuring that they are following their sustainable measures that they have in place for those certifications. So I'm excited to speak with them and see how they're regulating all of that. The one thing that it does differ from Kopi Luwak is that there are certifications that are just beginning to get in place. They started in like 2016, 2017, so they're very fresh. And some of these coffee farmers I spoke with, they don't work just with one cooperative. They oftentimes work with other varying cooperatives, or they call themselves almost as coffee freelancers, so they go from place to place. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out with the whole certification processes. Are they following them? Are they not following them? But yeah, I will be asking those questions, so because as a consumer, I want to know where it's coming from. Yeah, hope that answers.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. Sorry, I'm Gabe from the University of Colorado. My first question is for Christian. So one of the major criticisms of AI art has been that it appropriates other artists' work through aggregation of visual data. Is that something that these people who are doing AI art, did they respond to that criticism? Did they have a way of thinking about that?
Great question. So pretty much during my reporting, I asked them that question about that, if it was ethically sound to use AI art, and so everybody pretty much had the same answer for that. They thought of it as a tool, but they believed that their work wasn't infringing upon anybody's rights or anything like that, or anybody's creative freedoms. But they felt that everybody actually felt that AI needs to be regulated, just so they want to know where to have the source of where the work is coming from. Even the AI artists want to know where it comes from before they publish it. But so pretty much everybody kind of responded in a way that they believe it's just to be an artist ethically. They want to kind of know where it comes from. But everybody who I interviewed used Midjourney and ChatGPT. And as of now, it doesn't really explain where they get the work from. So right now, it's pretty much in just a collage of other people's work previously. So actually, that's something I didn't touch upon. The reason I interviewed Rootport was he was the first one I actually noticed that was in Japan, because his work was being heavily criticized in the media when he created he created his AI manga, because pretty much when he created it, the narrative of the actual work went through. It actually follows an artist who is an AI creator in Japan, and so that was his whole narrative. But when it was released, people didn't read it yet, and so they kind of figured out that it was about that. So the narrative was kind of ingrained within it about AI art. But pretty much, people started getting receptive to it after they kind of understood what it was. But at first, everybody kind of was thinking, because a lot of the work that was within it reflected artwork that was already previously created by another, an actual artist who passed away, and they were calling him in the news untalented, couldn't draw or anything like that. So that's why I kind of went to him first. But yeah, so everybody kind of has a mind state of wanting to have that copyright legislation kind of passed in Japan to determine where everything's kind of coming from. But yeah, thanks for the question.
Hi, my name is Lauren. I'm from WashU in St. Louis. And I have a bit of a 2-part question for John. Can you remind me again where you sourced your numbers from? And were there any complications with holes in the numbers or being able to trust that source? And then the second part of that question is, do you personally have background in crunching numbers and using numbers and data in that form of research? Or was this kind of a learn as you go kind of thing, and how did you navigate that?
Thank you for the question. So I'm going to try to summarize it really quickly back. Were there holes in the data? Where did it come from? And then, do I have experience in working with data? So the first question is, I submitted an open records request to the Mississippi Arts Commission. So the data comes from the Arts Commission from applications that are submitted to the Arts Commission by nonprofits that are applying for grant money. It did raise questions about the data because in the process, the demographic data, it's all self-reported. I have learned that the State Arts Commission does not do site visits. So the State Arts Commission, there's a process gap there. So I am relying upon the process itself, and I'm looking at the data as supplied through this process, which itself identifies a couple of spots that raise additional questions. Do I have, no, this was my first open records request, and this was my first time to compile this much data, and so I've hit a pause button because now that it's compiled, I want to proof it. And so the question is, the data comes in tables, it comes in grant applications, it comes in different spreadsheets, and so it's a matter of thinking through, okay, before this data gets published, I want to go back over it with a fine-tooth comb to make sure it's provided accurately as it was provided to me. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Michaela. I'm with the Pulitzer Center team. I also have a question for you, John, kind of a two-parter. And I wouldn't be surprised if this isn't easily available, but were you able to find any data on the Arts Commission themselves and the demographics of who are making these funding decisions? And then also you said that the data that you were looking at is the applications. Is there any sort of record keeping on the organizations that are actually receiving the funding and the demographics of those organizations? Are they the primarily white organizations versus some of the diverse ones? And I guess ultimately I'd be curious if there's a correlation between the people making those decisions and the organizations receiving them. But I know that gets into a lot of messy numbers, so I was just curious if you'd been able to find anything on that.
So the best way for me to respond to that is I do have a couple of key interviews left to conduct. One of them is with the director of the State Arts Commission. And the process itself, you're asking questions that really relate to the process itself. I do have data on the board of governors for the State Arts Commission. The decision makers itself, it tends to be composed of volunteers from the field each year. And so that's part of what we'll be going into the questions with the director of the State Arts Commission. And you asked me another question, but I know I've lost track of. Yeah.
I was just curious if you had any numbers on the organizations that were actually receiving the funding and like the amounts of funding that were being received, because I think you said you were looking primarily at the applications of the organizations.
Oh, yes, thank you, yes. So I do know of those 136 and 127, which ones were approved and which ones were declined. One surprise was that most every application gets approved. There were only a handful of declinations each year, and it appears at the moment to be based on either out of geographic scope or completely incomplete applications. So that was a surprise that most applicants are approved.
All right, I see you all over there. Hang on just a sec. I'm making my way. Speed walking. Here you go, Maggie.
Hi, I'm Maggie, and I'm from Yale, and my question is also for John. I'm just really curious about this ethics complaint that you had to file. What happened there, and also do you think it says anything broader about like transparency and freedom of information?
So you asked about the ethics complaint and transparency of the process. Did I hear that correctly? Okay. The process is straightforward. It was nerve-wracking, but the process was straightforward. I submitted open records requests to the State Arts Commission, and there is an office of ethics that you can call and seek advice for. And before I filed the complaint, I called the office and I told them, "Here's what's going on. Have I waited long enough? Is this normal? Is this time length normal?" And getting them to say, "No, this is not normal." So I filled out the ethics complaint, which was basically attaching the request, all the emails back and forth, and the non-responded emails that I'd gotten to. recognizing too that the past executive director of the Arts Commission had left, and they were interviewing and seeking a new executive director. So there was a major staff change happening at the same time. And so that was the process itself. Does it say anything? That's a question I'm wrestling with. Is the delay in providing the records a function of staffing at the organization, or is it a function of lack of care? The follow-up with the second records request with the new director I mentioned, by the way, I submitted an ethics complaint last year, or the previous cycle to get the data, and so they were extremely responsive this time, so.
I'm coming. Anyone?
Okay. Hi, my question is for Abby. I was just interested in knowing if you're going to look into how do I phrase this? So like how other factors like climate change or like the use of the kind of mass use of and caging of these civets, how it affects. I mean, I guess this is kind of part of your process anyway. But I was wondering if you're looking at how it affects the like supply for like farmers who are using the wild method. Particularly more interested in the climate change question, because I know you've done a little digging around like the kind of the exposés that are out there.
Yeah, so it was difficult because there are so many angles of this industry. It is very difficult to cover all of it. And environmentalism was a big aspect. Sorry, I'll move like this way so you can. It won't be the largest part of my story because I talked with my mentor and kind of like worked through what I want to prioritize and not prioritize, but it is a very interesting aspect because these animals are being taken from the wild, and there is a very important symbiotic relationship with these coffee farmers and the civets, excluding Kopi Luwak, just speaking about Arabica coffee, because the civets, they eat all these other fruits, avocados, guava, passion fruit, and these are taller trees. They act as canopies for the coffee, and Arabica coffee needs to be grown in shade. So these animals that are eating the coffee cherries and other fruits and seeds, when they defecate, these seeds are being scattered, and so they're also aware of that. So when they pick up the paydays, they're not taking out all of them. They're leaving some so the seeds can scatter and repropagate and grow more trees, because that ultimately, good treatment of the animals also means that they're helping grow these other trees that help them grow their coffee, and that the Arabica coffee is their main source of income. Kopi Luwak almost acts as this extra income for them, but it allows them to have a little bit more stability, being able to send their children to school and that sort of thing. So yes, there is a lot of talk about that, and it is unfortunate. I talked with a woman of the name of Jess Hooper. She is working on a documentary called The Civet Project, and she actually just started collaborating with Jane Goodall on this about civet species, the viverine species, not just the Asian palm civets, who are all being encaged across Southeast Asia for these factory farming. And so it was interesting to speak to her. It had nothing to do about the cultural aspect or about the farmers, the people, or what it means to them, but specifically just how is it affecting these animals and the environmentalism. And I would really encourage, if you are more interested, to look it up, because it is a different perspective. She actually did a whole kind of protest to this by having a human consume coffee, defecate that, and roast it, and it sold for, I can't remember, but it was a ridiculous amount, like $1,000 for like a pound. And so supposedly that is now the most expensive coffee in the world, is this human-produced coffee, and it was a protest too that this shouldn't be happening. So there's a lot going on here, which is why I had to narrow down just to focus on one aspect, because and I want to continue to write articles on all the other aspects. But yeah, I'm sorry, I hope that answers all your questions.
Okay, now it's on. Hi, guys. My name is Layla, as I was saying before I go down to college. My question is for Brittany. And I was thinking about your project, like in my climate change brain. And sometimes I feel like the fault of climate change is placed on the communities that are impacted by it the most. And they're the ones who are told, like, you shouldn't be using a plastic straw, or you should be buying sustainable clothing. And like, how, as a journalist, do you navigate writing your pieces where it isn't like, if you are buying off Shein because that's all you can afford, you're hurting your environment, and you should be like me, who's like, not you, I'm just saying, but like you should be like me, who's wearing eco-friendly clothing that markets for $200. I know that you're saying that the clothes was comparable to Zara, but that's not really an affordable option for most people who are lower income. Mm-hmm. So how do you navigate telling these stories without making it seem like the fault is on lower income people who buy Shein clothing? Thanks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when I was first thinking about my project, I was worried about that because it's not really the lower income people's fault, to be honest. It's the people who can't afford to buy the nicer quality clothing, and then they're buying like hundreds of dollars at like Shein or whatever, and like buying all these fast fashion when they can afford to do that. In my article, I didn't even talk about like what consumers should do, just because I think that's a whole other like topic in itself. I talked about like legislation that should be passed, because really it should be on the companies and the retailers to be responsible and be held accountable. As much as it matters that consumers care and everything, at the end of the day, it is on the companies to be smart. And when I spoke to my expert from Human Rights Watch, she even said like a handful of companies to do the right thing on their own, but everyone else, they need that push, and they need it to be a law to do the right thing. So basically, legislation is where I focused on. Thank you.
All right. And on that note, unfortunately, I think it is time to call this panel complete. So congratulations. Thank you.